And let's talk about some poly painting options before we get into the groups loops portion of this. First, poly painting. You'll notice down here underneath the color swatchers there's a gradient button. So if you hit let's grab a red color and we'll leave the other one black and we'll turn on gradient. And if you paint with that on, it's going to actually have a gradient between the red color and the black color. That'll get you some interesting results. Go ahead and undo that. With that red color selected, we'll go ahead and turn gradient off. We'll go into our materials and we'll grab chrome blue tint. And we'll go ahead and have mRGB selected and we'll go to color, fill object. And then we'll grab, we'll hit B and then H for that hard polish brush. We'll grab a blue. And with the polish brush, that kind of gives you an interesting kind of airbrushed, like a funny car airbrushed look. So definitely use the polish brushes to poly paint. Get some interesting looks. As well as, let's go ahead and go back to our basic material, mRGB, color, fill object, back into our standard brush. One last thing about poly painting, if you go under brush and you scroll down and you go into alpha and texture, you'll see there's a new poly paint mode. As you can see there in the pop-up, number 1 is standard, and that's just standard poly painting. 2 is colorize, 3 is multiply, 4 is lighten, and 5 is darken. Those work just like they do in Photoshop. So while you're poly painting, if you need to do any of that stuff, definitely move this poly paint mode out. Just remember that you did it, so you don't get frustrated as you poly paint and you forget that you actually move the mode. It'll stay that way until you move it back. And that's all the new poly painting stuff. So let's get into poly painting and the groups loops. First, let's go up to RGB and we'll change our color to blue, and it's at 100%. Then we'll go to color, fill object, and then we'll grab a red color. And let's just paint out a portion of this that we want to have a group loop around. If you don't know exactly what that means, don't worry about it. We'll get into it. So we're gonna paint some holes in this guy, or we want some group loops. And you can do multiple. So we'll grab a green and go ahead and surround this one with a green. And I'm not being overly careful because this is a demonstration and I don't want to make you fall asleep, but let's do some really quick grouping here to demonstrate. And go ahead and do another color back here. Alright, we got this poly paint, and if you go down here underneath poly paint, I'm sorry, poly groups, you'll see a button down here that says from poly paint. Here's your poly paint tolerance. I think 0.1 will be fine for this one. The larger your tolerance, the more groups you'll get. But I think it'll group this one fine. So we'll go ahead and do poly groups from poly paint. And if you go up here, and we'll open our subtool menu, and we'll turn off this brush icon. Make that back to white, so we can actually see our poly groups when we go into polyframe. And you'll see it actually made poly groups where our poly paint was based on the colors. Now remember from part 1, poly groups can be broken apart by Control Shift and clicking. You can hide and show different areas. However, so you can do this, and you can hold hit Control, and you can make that masked, and then you can sculpt around it. Go to Z add. However, if you start doing that, you're going to get a really nasty line around that, and we're going for a hard edge, nice smooth look. So what we need to do, go ahead and do that. We're going to turn our polyframe back on, and underneath geometry, there's a new groups loops button. The first option over here is loops, number of loops. So if you hit groups loops with 4, what it's going to do is around every one of these groups loops, it's going to add 4 edge loops. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can actually increase that, and if you want it really tight in there, a lot of geometry in there, you can increase that, or you can decrease it. We'll hit Control Z, we'll make that down to 0, and we hit groups loops. It's actually going to try and make an edge loop around this, and you'll notice there's triangles in there. That's because we have this triangle on. You can turn that off if you don't want triangles to be created when you do groups loops. But there's actually no loops around that. We'll go ahead and do that, and we'll leave that at 4. And we'll hit groups loops. Now we've got groups loops. So let's turn off polyframe and see what those actually do. If you just start sculpting, you're not gonna see it doing much of anything. So what you need to do is, there's 2 methods. You can Control Shift where you have a group loop, and you can do you can mask it, and then Control Shift to show everything again, and you can invert that mask. Let's say you want to go down here to your deformation, and you can actually inflate that or deflate it. A couple different ways to do it. The fastest way to do it is to go up here under Brush, and if you go down here to where you have auto masking, you now have a mask by polygroups. If you control shift over or if you control over this, you'll read that the higher the number, the less polygroups it'll affect. So you can crank this up to 100, and you start brushing. What you're brushing is only going to affect that very first polygroup that you hit, or that you actually touched. If I go over here and start polypainting, it's only going to polypaint in that polygroup that I put over there. And if you're having trouble remembering where they are, just turn on polyframe and you can see. Or you can turn off polyframe and you can go back up here and you can click this little brush icon. And I guess I got rid of our polypaint. So what we can do, we can go back down here to your polypaint and you can go polypaint from polygroup. And that'll bring your polypaint back. So you can actually see where your stuff is. So if you turn that off, you'll go out of polypaint mode. You turn it back on, you're colorized again, and you can actually see where your groups are. Let's go ahead and turn off RGB. So we've got polygroups, and we've got our brush set to 100. Now, if we go to brush and mask by polygroups, and we turn that down to 50, you can click in this green one, and it'll affect that green one the most, but it'll also affect the polygroups around it a little bit less, by about 50%. So that's two different methods. Go ahead and leave that at 100, I suppose. And we'll go into Alt-W, which is our shortcut key to go to move. And you can actually just start moving these out. So remember, the first one you grab, it's going to move that one and leave the rest of them alone. So if you grab this green part, it's going to move that out. Grab the red part, it's going to move that out or in. And these are just really quick ways to do really precise hard edge stuff and have it go ahead and add those edge loops in for you so you can get really nice deformations around those groups. Go ahead and move these in and out or however you want to do it. And again, I'm not being real careful about what I'm doing here, but I think you get the point that it's really easy to make group loops and it's really fun to say, and you can get some really nice results really fast. And if you're really careful about what you're doing, you know, you can get exactly what you want pretty quickly. Let's go ahead and turn our polypaint off, and we'll make it a, we'll grab our chrome blue tint. And again, you can go in here and you can smooth. Let's go ahead and go to our brush and mask by polygroups back down to 0. Because I want to go ahead and sculpt on everything all the changes we've made. Turn that polypaint back off. And we'll go and grab one of our, we'll hit B and then hit H for that hard polish brush that we like. And you can go in here and you can start smoothing these areas out. You can start, turn off RGB for that hard polish. And just turn on Z add. Crank it up a little bit. So now, on those groups that you moved out, you can go in here and polish those up. Really clean up those surfaces if you want to. Or you can go into your brushes and trim dynamic. You can go ahead and crease those. And you can also go under geometry and divide if you need a little more resolution. So again, just a really quick way to go and add loops around your geometry to get some really nice deformation. Then of course you can go back in and clean up with your smooth brush or your clay finisher or your polish brushes that you like to use. And really just kind of clean up your mesh.